Far beyond the familiar stars of the Milky Way, in the quiet depths of space where humans had only recently begun to explore. A small listening station orbited a lonely planet. This station was built to capture every faint whisper from the cosmos, signals that might be messages, scientific data, or warnings. It was a lonely job for the team stationed there, a mixture of scientists, linguists, and engineers who spent months staring at screens, decoding transmissions and charting patterns. Space was silent most of the time. Stars blinked far away, planets drifted in empty orbits, and comets traced their lonely paths across the void. Life on the station was quiet, predictable, and often boring. Until the day everything changed, it began as a small anomaly. A faint blip in the readings that nobody could immediately explain. At first, the scientists thought it was a glitch, a minor fluctuation in the instruments. Signals from deep space were often noisy, garbled, or incomplete. But this signal was different. It repeated itself, slowly but clearly, in a pattern that suggested intelligence. Dr. Lena Morrow, the station's chief linguist, was the first to recognize it. She had spent years studying patterns of communication, from human languages to mathematical codes and even potential extraterrestrial signals. When she saw the pattern, her heart skipped a beat. "Listen to this," she said, pointing to the waveform on the screen. "This isn't random. It's structured. Someone, or something, is trying to communicate." Her colleagues gathered around, skeptical at first. Deep space signals were often misread. Every month, false alarms set off excitement that faded into disappointment. But as the signal repeated, it became impossible to ignore. It was a sequence of pulses, irregular at times, but unmistakably patterned. Using algorithms designed to detect linguistic patterns, the team began to break it down. At first, it was just sounds, beeps, clicks, and pulses. But soon, images began to emerge when they processed the data. The transmission contained visual snippets of cities burning, streets filled with frightened figures running, of alien faces twisted in fear. This was not just a message. It was a plea. The humans stared in stunned silence. They had expected maybe a simple distress call or a mathematical puzzle left behind by another civilization. They had not expected this, a full cry for help, sent from a world in chaos. Dr. Morrow's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. These beings are in danger. They're asking for help, and it's urgent." The station immediately transmitted the data back to Earth. By the time it arrived, governments and military leaders were already in crisis meetings. Some were skeptical. Could this be a trap? Could the signal be a ploy? A trick? A warning? But the images were clear, horrifying, and undeniable. The planet sending the signal was under attack. Cities were being destroyed and its inhabitants were defenseless. As the debate raged, the Deathworlder Fleet Command quietly made their decision. They were an elite force, humans trained and hardened on some of the most hostile planets in human-controlled space. They had faced deadly storms, extreme gravity, toxic environments, and savage wildlife, and survived. Their training was unmatched, their equipment was advanced, and their philosophy was simple. No civilization's cry for help should go unanswered. A fleet was assembled with remarkable speed. Massive warships, their hulls gleaming in the distant sunlight, prepared to leave Earth's orbit and head for the alien system. Soldiers were briefed, engineers prepared equipment, medics packed emergency supplies, and diplomats were included to negotiate if needed. Every team member knew the stakes. They were going into an unknown world, facing enemies they could not yet identify, to save beings whose very existence depended on them. Meanwhile, back at the listening station, the SOS signal continued to repeat. The humans there watched as the images flickered across their screens. Terrified civilians running through debris-strewn streets. Strange alien creatures trying desperately to mount defenses. Buildings collapsing in clouds of dust and fire. Even from light years away, the desperation was palpable. The team worked around the clock, trying to decipher more details about the attackers, the alien species, and the planet's environment. Every moment they delayed increased the danger for the creatures calling for help. Despite the fear and uncertainty, excitement coursed through the human teams. This was what they were trained for, what they had been waiting for. Humanity had long explored the stars, but rarely had they been confronted with a chance to intervene directly in the affairs of another intelligent species. Now, that chance had arrived. The fleet's departure was a spectacle. Ships moved in perfect formation, leaving Earth's orbit and slipping into faster-than-light travel. Inside each vessel, soldiers prepared themselves mentally and physically. Some checked their weapons, others double-checked maps and tactical data. Everyone knew this would not be a simple rescue. They were heading into a war zone, a world already under siege with unknown enemies. And yet, there was a shared sense of purpose. Humanity had a reputation among nearby civilizations, fierce, relentless, and protective. The Deathworlders were about to prove it once more. As the fleet traveled, the human teams continued studying the signals. They learned more about the alien language, a complex series of sounds and symbols that seemed nearly impossible to reproduce. They pieced together glimpses of culture, technology, and society. The aliens, known as the Elirani, were physically fragile compared to humans, but intelligent, artistic, and deeply communal. They were fighting for survival against an aggressor whose technology and firepower far outmatched them. Hours turned into days. Every new transmission brought more details, more urgency. The Elirani were losing ground, their cities burning and their cries echoing through space. Humans felt the weight of responsibility. These were not just images on a screen, they were lives, entire communities depending on them. The fleet accelerated, knowing that every moment counted. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, arriving at the edge of the alien star system. Ahead, the planet glowed with orange and red flashes of fire, smoke curling into the thin atmosphere. The signal had led them directly to the heart of the crisis. From orbit, they could see the devastation. Cities leveled, alien vehicles overturned, and thousands of lives at risk. The humans prepared to act. Soldiers donned their armor, engineers readied equipment to repair or rebuild critical systems, and medics stocked supplies to treat the wounded. Diplomats prepared messages of reassurance to the Elirani, letting them know that help had arrived, that humans would fight to protect them. Dr. Moreau, watching from the fleet's command ship, felt a mix of awe and apprehension. This was history in the making. Humanity was no longer just observing the cosmos, they were participants, saviors, and warriors. The SOS signal, once a faint blip in the endless darkness, had brought them here. It had called humanity to action, proving that even across light years, the cries of the desperate could be heard and answered. And so, with determination burning as fiercely as the fires below, the Deathworlders prepared to descend. They were about to enter a world in chaos, a world where every step would matter. Every decision could save or doom countless lives. But they were ready. Humanity had answered the call, and nothing in the universe would stop them from fulfilling it. The fleet on the brink of entering the planet's orbit, ready to face the unknown. And with the Elirani's desperate hope resting entirely on the shoulders of humans who had come from a distant world to save them, asterisk. As the human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel, the first sight of the alien planet took everyone's breath away. From orbit, it glowed with chaotic lights and smoke. Massive explosions punctuated the surface, sending plumes of fire and debris into the thin atmosphere. Cities, once beautiful clusters of Elirani architecture, were reduced to ruins. High towers, delicate bridges, and wide plazas were shattered, with roads cracked and rivers choked with debris. The human commanders quickly realized that this was no minor skirmish or border dispute. This planet was under a full-scale assault. The Elirani, the planet's inhabitants, were nowhere near ready for such devastation. They were a fragile species, physically smaller and weaker than humans. And their technology, while advanced in some ways, could not withstand the sheer force of the invading attackers. From the fleet's vantage point, human officers could see hundreds of Elirani trying desperately to fight back. Using small defensive weapons, barely managing to slow the enemy's advance, it was a heartbreaking sight. Streets that had once been filled with laughter, marketplaces, and music were now streets of terror and panic. People fled in every direction, trying to hide or escape. But the attackers were relentless. The human fleet immediately established a defensive perimeter around the planet. Massive warships formed a protective orbit, their shields activated and weapon systems locked onto the aggressors. For the Alirani below, the sudden appearance of the humans was like a miracle. Enormous ships with hulls that shimmered in the light, and weapons capable of obliterating entire enemy formations descended from the sky. We have received your call. We are here to help. You are not alone. The reaction was immediate. Civilians began to cry, some falling to their knees in relief. Soldiers still fighting paused, disbelief written on their faces. The human presence was intimidating, but it brought hope in equal measure. The Deathworlders had a reputation across human space for being unstoppable and disciplined, trained to survive and fight in conditions that would kill ordinary humans. For the Alirani, witnessing their arrival was inspiring and terrifying at the same time. Within hours, the first human landing teams were deployed. Transport ships lowered armored squads to the surface, carefully selecting drop zones that would maximize their impact while avoiding further harm to civilians. Soldiers moved with precision, their training allowing them to navigate streets filled with debris, collapsing buildings, and enemy ambushes. Every step was calculated, every action deliberate. Medics and engineers followed closely behind, ready to provide immediate assistance to the injured and repair critical infrastructure wherever possible. The first encounters with the Alirani were delicate. The aliens were frightened and confused, some hiding from humans who they had never seen before, unsure if these newcomers were saviors or enemies. But the humans were patient. They communicated using gestures, simple, universal symbols, and slowly they managed to establish trust. They showed their weapons not to threaten, but to demonstrate that they could protect the Alirani from the ongoing attack. One human officer, Captain Raina Holt, personally led a group through a narrow street to rescue a family trapped in a collapsed building. They lifted debris, guided the terrified aliens to safety, and reassured them with calm words and gestures. For the Alirani, this was unlike anything they had seen before, humans willing to risk their lives for complete strangers. Meanwhile, the human fleet in orbit began to engage the enemy ships that had been striking the planet. Laser batteries fired in precise volleys, targeting enemy formations while minimizing collateral damage to Alirani infrastructure. Missiles streaked across the sky, creating trails of light before detonating near hostile forces. The attackers, though powerful, were unprepared for the humans' combination of strategy, technology, and fearless soldiers. Every attack by the humans disrupted enemy supply lines, slowed their advance, and gave the Alirani a chance to regroup and evacuate civilians from the most dangerous areas. On the ground, human engineers worked quickly to stabilize critical infrastructure. Power grids that had been damaged by enemy bombardment were repaired in record time. Bridges and roads that had been destroyed were reinforced or replaced with temporary structures, allowing safe passage for fleeing civilians. Human medics set up field hospitals in open plazas and large buildings that were still standing. These temporary medical centers treated the wounded, providing advanced care that the Alirani had never seen. For many, it was the difference between life and death. Children, elders, and injured soldiers alike were saved by human intervention. Often under enemy fire, the humans also began gathering intelligence on the attackers. They studied the alien invaders' patterns, learned their tactics, and mapped out their supply routes. This information allowed them to plan surgical strikes that disrupted the enemy without causing unnecessary harm to the Alirani. It was careful, calculated work, blending military strategy with humanitarian concern, a hallmark of the Deathworlder approach. Even as the humans fought and rescued, they remained aware of the psychological impact on the Alirani. The aliens had never faced enemies this powerful, and the sudden appearance of humans created both hope and awe. Soldiers and civilians alike looked to the newcomers with a mix of fear, respect, and gratitude. Some whispered stories of legends that had long existed in Alirani culture, tales of beings from distant worlds, who appeared in times of great need. For the first time, the Illyarani began to believe those legends might be true. Throughout the chaos, Captain Holt and her team encountered situations that tested their training and humanity. They rescued groups trapped under rubble, calmed panicked crowds, and even protected Illyarani scientists working to preserve vital research and technology. Every rescue operation carried risk, as enemy forces adapted to human tactics and launched counterattacks. Yet the humans moved with efficiency and bravery that seemed almost superhuman to the Illyarani. Communication between humans and Illyarani leaders was also established. Using a combination of translation devices and human intuition, negotiators managed to coordinate evacuations, plan defensive maneuvers, and reassure the population that help had truly arrived. The Illyarani began to cooperate more fully, guiding humans through streets, pointing out hidden dangers and sharing knowledge about enemy weaknesses. Together, humans and Illyarani started to form a bond built on trust, necessity, and shared survival. As the first day of the battle unfolded, it became clear that the presence of humans had shifted the balance. Enemy forces, confident and ruthless just hours before, were now forced to retreat in certain areas. Entire city blocks were secured, and thousands of civilians were evacuated to temporary safe zones established by the humans. Even small victories had enormous impact, giving hope to those who had nearly given up. By the end of the day, the humans had achieved something extraordinary. They had arrived in a world under siege, assessed the situation, coordinated with the local population, rescued thousands of civilians, and begun to push back the invaders. And yet, this was only the beginning. The human commanders knew the enemy was stronger than they had anticipated, and that securing the planet would require far more than initial interventions. But they had established a foothold that gave the Illyarani a chance to survive. The Illyarani, for their part, were beginning to understand the humans' true nature. They saw beings willing to risk life and limb for strangers. Beings capable of walking through fire, enduring danger, and never faltering. The aliens whispered among themselves, calling humans the Iron Protectors, amazed by the courage and discipline they displayed. For many, it was a profound cultural shock, reshaping how they viewed the universe and their place in it. As night fell on the ravaged cities, the fires still smoldering in many districts. Humans continued to move through the streets. Soldiers on patrol, engineers repairing damaged infrastructure, medics tending to the injured. None paused. None hesitated. Every action carried purpose. The Illyarani watched with a mixture of fear, admiration, and relief. For the first time in days, they felt that survival was possible. By the close of this day, the Deathworlders had demonstrated the most important thing: hope. They had arrived not as conquerors, but as protectors, not as invaders, but as saviors. The Illyarani had witnessed courage in its purest form, a force that no enemy could easily overcome, and in those moments, humanity showed that answering a desperate call for help could change the fate of an entire world. The human fleet firmly in orbit, landing teams active on the surface, and thousands of Illyarani civilians beginning to recover from the chaos. The first steps of rescue, protection, and collaboration had been taken, but the battle for the planet was far from over. What had begun as a single SOS signal had grown into a massive effort to save a species from extinction, a mission that would test every skill, every tactic, and every ounce of courage the humans had to offer. Asterisk. The humans had now firmly established themselves on the surface of the Illyarani planet. After the initial shock of their arrival, the aliens began to witness the true scale of what humans could do. Soldiers trained on Deathworlds were not only skilled but seemingly fearless, capable of surviving and thriving in environments that would have killed ordinary humans. The Illyarani watched with awe as these newcomers moved through streets still smoldering from explosions, through areas littered with debris, shattered buildings, and dangerous terrain. With a calm and deliberate precision that made them appear almost invincible, the first human infantry squads deployed in what was perhaps the most dangerous part of the planet, the central city. Where fighting had been heaviest, enemy forces had concentrated their attacks here, hoping to crush the Alirani spirit and wipe out as many civilians as possible. Massive firestorms burned across streets. Buildings that had withstood the initial bombardments were now vulnerable to collapse. Yet the humans advanced without hesitation. Their armor, heavy and reinforced, protected them from debris, energy blasts, and environmental hazards. Their weapons, carefully designed to be effective against hostile forces while minimizing harm to civilians, unleashed precise and devastating force against the attackers. The Alirani civilians had mixed emotions. Fear still ran deep. Many had never seen creatures as large and imposing as humans, but hope now shone brightly alongside it. When human squads moved into a burning district to rescue trapped families, carry the wounded, or repel attackers, the aliens began to realize that these newcomers were not just warriors, they were protectors. The humans moved with coordination and intelligence that seemed almost supernatural, adapting to every obstacle, responding to ambushes, turning dangerous situations into opportunities to save lives. Captain Raina Holt led one such squad into the heart of the city. They navigated a maze of broken streets, fallen structures, and raging fires, guided by Alirani civilians who could point out hidden dangers. At one intersection, enemy forces had established a makeshift barricade, armed with energy weapons that could easily disintegrate unarmored beings. Holt's squad paused briefly, analyzing the situation. With calm, precise commands, they coordinated a flanking maneuver that neutralized the barricade without harming the surrounding civilians. Alirani, who witnessed the operation, gasped at the human skill. Unable to comprehend how they could move so fearlessly in the midst of such chaos, every action the humans took was calculated to protect life while maximizing tactical advantage. Engineers followed closely behind, setting up temporary shields, repairing damaged infrastructure, and reinforcing buildings so they could serve as safe havens. Medics moved with the squads, treating injuries on the spot, often under enemy fire. Their ability to perform complex medical procedures in such conditions was nothing short of miraculous to the Alirani. Children were lifted from danger zones and handed over to Alirani volunteers, while the injured and elderly were moved to secure zones for more intensive care. The presence of humans quickly turned the tide in small battles across the city. Enemy forces, who had once roamed the streets freely, began to retreat or regroup, wary of these strange newcomers who seemed almost unstoppable. The Alirani soldiers, previously overwhelmed, now fought alongside humans, inspired by their courage and skill. Humans trained the aliens on the spot, showing them new tactics, defensive formations, and ways to use the environment to their advantage. For the first time, the Alirani began to feel that they had a chance to survive and fight back. It wasn't just the fighting that impressed the aliens, it was the humans' adaptability and fearlessness. Deathworlder soldiers had trained in some of the deadliest environments known to humanity. They had survived freezing wastelands, scorched deserts, high-gravity planets, and toxic atmospheres. On this Alirani world, filled with unfamiliar hazards and stable buildings, volatile fires and strange weather patterns, they adapted immediately. They moved as though the city's destruction was nothing more than a minor obstacle, walking through hazardous zones with precision and calm, a sight that made the aliens both frightened and inspired. Meanwhile, high above in orbit, human warships provided crucial support. Laser batteries and projectile weapons targeted enemy concentrations, clearing streets and buildings for the infantry below. Enemy reinforcements from orbit were intercepted and destroyed before they could reach the surface. The combination of ground and orbital operations created a synergy the Alirani had never seen before, effectively neutralizing threats and giving civilians room to flee and regroup. One particularly daring mission involved an elite human squad tasked with neutralizing the enemy command ship that hovered above the planet. This vessel coordinated attacks, deployed enemy forces, and controlled key weapon platforms. The humans planned their operation meticulously, coordinating with engineers, medics, and ground teams. They infiltrated the enemy craft using stealth technology, moving through corridors filled with hostile forces. Every step was precise, calculated, executed with a combination of bravery and strategy that left even the most hardened Elirani observers in awe. In the end, they disabled the command ship, cutting off the enemy's control and allowing humans and Elirani on the ground to gain a significant advantage. The Elirani's perception of humans shifted dramatically. No longer were they merely powerful beings, they were disciplined, fearless, and compassionate. They risked their lives not for personal gain, not for conquest, but purely to protect and save. The Elirani civilians began to see them as heroes, almost legendary figures, embodying ideals they had long thought existed only in stories. Children, who had hidden in shelters and crouched in fear, now peeked out to watch the humans in action. Soldiers who had felt hopeless before now felt inspired to stand and fight. The humans did not just fight. They taught, guided, and rescued. Engineers worked to restore essential services where possible, making temporary bridges, repairing energy lines, and establishing communication hubs so that Elirani leaders could coordinate their people. Medics organized triage stations and taught basic emergency care to Elirani volunteers. Every small victory, every life saved, reinforced the humans' presence as a force not only of war but also of protection and hope, even in the midst of the battle. Moments of humanity shone through. Holt personally rescued a group of children trapped in a school building, carrying them through flames and rubble to a safe zone. Soldiers held the hands of frightened civilians, guiding them past danger zones, calming them with words and gestures. Engineers dismantled unstable structures before they collapsed, while medics treated injuries that seemed impossible to survive. Each act, small or large, strengthened the bond between humans and Elirani. As the day progressed, more areas of the city were secured. Enemy forces were pushed back, civilians were evacuated, and key infrastructure stabilized. The Elirani began to participate actively, motivated by the humans' courage. Soldiers and civilians alike worked alongside their saviors, learning tactics, sharing intelligence, and beginning to feel a sense of control they had lost at the start of the attack. Yet the battle was far from over. Human commanders knew that the enemy would regroup and attempt counterattacks. But by establishing footholds in key districts, rescuing thousands of civilians, and demonstrating unmatched tactical skill, they had fundamentally shifted the balance. The Elirani now had a fighting chance, and their hope, once nearly extinguished, was reignited by nightfall. The streets of the central city were quiet in comparison to earlier chaos. Fires still burned in some districts, but many civilians had been safely moved to secure zones. The humans maintained patrols, ready to respond to any new threats. Engineers continued to stabilize structures, medics treated the remaining injured, and soldiers prepared for the next wave of enemy attacks. The Elirani, exhausted but grateful, began to understand the humans' true power and intentions. They had faced an unimaginable threat, and yet these strangers from another world had entered their midst, fearless and disciplined, saving countless lives. They whispered stories among themselves, calling humans the giants who walk through fire, marveling at their courage and endurance. The humans fully engaged in the heart of the battle. They had demonstrated their skill, courage, and compassion, turning hopelessness into hope. Civilians were safe, soldiers were inspired, and the city, though battered, was slowly being reclaimed. The Deathworlders' presence had become a beacon of hope, showing that even in the darkest hours, survival and victory was possible when courage, skill, and compassion led the way. The humans had been on the planet for several days, and their presence was already changing the course of the battle. The Elirani, once hopeless and scattered, had begun to organize under the guidance of the humans. Soldiers who had been paralyzed by fear now moved with purpose, coordinating defenses and assisting civilians. Families who had been hiding in rubble-strewn streets or crowded shelters. This collaboration transformed the once disorganized defenders into a competent force capable of pushing back the invaders. While the fighting continued on the streets, the humans' orbital fleet played a critical role in controlling the skies. Enemy reinforcements attempted to enter the city from orbit, but human warships intercepted them with devastating efficiency. Precision strikes from above cleared large enemy concentrations, allowing ground teams to advance safely. The combination of orbital firepower and ground operations created a synergy that the enemy could not overcome. Slowly but surely, humans in Alirani were reclaiming the city, district by district. Amid the chaos, human medics and engineers worked tirelessly. Medics moved through the streets, often under fire, to treat the wounded. They performed advanced procedures that the Alirani had never seen before, saving lives that would otherwise have been lost. Engineers dismantled unstable structures, preventing collapses that could have caused further casualties. Even in the middle of battle, humans maintained a focus on protecting life, not just defeating the enemy. Civilians watched in awe as soldiers, medics, and engineers coordinated flawlessly, turning destruction into organized rescue and defense. One pivotal mission involved reclaiming the Alirani Central Command Center, which had been captured by enemy forces. This building was critical housed communications equipment, tactical maps, and supplies for the defenders. The human squad, supported by Alirani soldiers, moved through the streets at night, using stealth and strategy to avoid detection. They neutralized enemy guards quietly, disabled traps, and cleared the building without causing damage that would have harmed the surrounding area. Once secured, the command center became the hub for coordinating the ongoing defense, drastically improving the efficiency of the Alirani forces. The enemy, realizing that they were losing control, attempted a large-scale strike aimed at breaking the humans' momentum. Massive war machines rolled through streets, firing indiscriminately. But the humans had anticipated this. They set up traps, coordinated crossfire, and used their superior tactics to counter the assault. The Alirani watched in astonishment as humans took on overwhelming odds without hesitation. Enemy units fell one by one, often before they could even reach the civilians they had intended to harm. The morale of the Alirani forces skyrocketed, and the civilians, inspired by the humans' courage, began helping wherever they could, bringing supplies, guiding soldiers, and even assisting medics. Throughout this period, humans were also focused on saving lives beyond the battlefield. Thousands of civilians had been injured or trapped in destroyed buildings. Temporary hospitals and triage centers were established in safe areas, staffed by human medics who trained Alirani volunteers in basic emergency care. Families who had been separated were reunited, and communities began to regain some sense of normalcy despite the ongoing conflict. Human engineers worked to restore electricity, water, and communications, ensuring that the Alirani had access to essential resources while the battle continued. The humans' actions were not limited to combat and rescue. They also worked to minimize long-term damage to the city. While enemy forces had no regard for buildings or infrastructure, humans carefully avoided destroying anything unnecessary. They repaired what could be repaired, reinforced what could be saved, and cleared debris in a way that allowed the city to be rebuilt after the conflict. The Alirani began to see that these humans were not just warriors, they were protectors of life, civilization, and culture. As the counterattacks continued, the humans' coordination with the Alirani forces grew stronger. Leaders on both sides communicated constantly, sharing intelligence, planning operations, and adapting to enemy movements. Every successful operation reinforced trust and mutual respect. The Alirani, once demoralized and fearful, now fought with renewed determination, inspired by the humans' courage and discipline. Together, they reclaimed districts that had been lost and established secure zones for civilians. One of the most dramatic moments came when a massive enemy strike threatened the city's primary water supply. Without it, thousands of civilians would have faced dehydration and chaos. Human engineers and soldiers coordinated a rapid response, working under heavy fire to repair damaged pipelines and secure the facility. Civilians watched in amazement as humans moved fearlessly through explosions and collapsing structures, restoring the water supply in record time. It was a vivid demonstration of humans' ability to combine tactical skill, bravery, and technical expertise in a way the Alirani had never seen before. By the end of this phase of the battle, the humans had accomplished something extraordinary. They had stabilized critical infrastructure, restored basic services, neutralized major enemy threats, and trained Alirani forces to defend themselves effectively. Thousands of civilians had been saved, and the invaders had been pushed back from key districts. The city, once on the brink of total destruction, now had pockets of safety and hope. The presence of humans had not only changed the outcome of battles, it had transformed the morale and spirit of an entire species. The Alirani began to understand the true power and nature of humans. They were not just fighters, they were teachers, healers, and protectors. They could endure extreme danger without fear, act with precision in chaotic situations, and inspire courage in those around them. The aliens whispered among themselves, marveling at the humans' discipline and bravery, realizing that without their intervention, much of their civilization would have been lost as night fell. The city's landscape had changed dramatically. Fires still burned in some districts, but the streets were largely clear. Civilians were safe, and key buildings had been secured. Patrols continued, medics and engineers remained active, and soldiers prepared for any potential threats from enemy reinforcements. The humans' presence had created a strong foundation for the Alirani to recover and fight back effectively. Humans and Alirani working together in harmony, turning despair into hope. The city, though battered and scarred, was beginning to see the first signs of recovery and resistance. Enemy forces had been pushed back, civilians were protected, and the humans had demonstrated that courage, skill, and compassion could change the course of an entire battle. The stage was now set for the final phase, the ultimate defeat of the invaders, the forging of a lasting alliance between the two species. Asterisk. With the battle turning decisively in favor of the humans and Alirani forces, the planet's atmosphere began to feel a shift. Where fear and chaos had dominated, there was now cautious optimism, hope slowly replacing despair. The Alirani people, who had once huddled in shelters and fled through crumbling streets, were beginning to see the humans as more than just powerful strangers. They were saviors, protectors, and allies. Every corner of the cities the humans had secured showed the combined effort of the two species, repaired buildings, secured streets, and civilians finally beginning to move freely without constant fear of attack. The humans continued to push back. The enemy forces, taking control of strategic areas and eliminating remaining pockets of resistance. Their discipline, advanced technology, and fearlessness overwhelmed the attackers, who were no longer able to regroup effectively. Every counterattack by the enemy was met with calculated precision. Orbital weapons from human warships struck with exacting accuracy, taking out major enemy units while minimizing harm to civilians. On the ground, human squads coordinated with Alirani forces to secure districts, evacuate injured civilians, and destroy enemy fortifications. The Alirani, inspired and trained by the humans, fought alongside them, showing courage they had not known they possessed. Meanwhile, human engineers and medics were transforming the planet. Hospitals were established in formerly devastated buildings, providing advanced care for wounded civilians and soldiers alike. Field kitchens, water purification systems, and temporary shelters were set up to ensure that even those who had lost their homes could survive the aftermath of the battle. Engineers repaired infrastructure wherever possible, restoring electricity, communication networks, and essential services. They worked tirelessly, often under threat of enemy counterattacks. But their efforts ensured that the Alirani population could start to rebuild their lives even before the fighting had completely ended. One of the most significant challenges faced by the humans during this phase was the restoration of the planet's main power grid. The grid had been heavily damaged during the initial enemy assault, and without it, much of the city could not function. Human engineers, assisted by Alirani technicians, coordinated a complex repair operation. They moved through damaged tunnels, reinforced crumbling power stations, and rerouted energy through temporary channels until the main grid could be restored. When the first districts powered up again, lights flickered back on in homes and public spaces, The sense of normalcy returned even in a city still marked by battle scars. The Al-Irani civilians celebrated, cutting off supply lines and communication channels. Drones and reconnaissance units patrolled the skies, keeping watch for any signs of retaliation. The Al-Irani, amazed by the humans' foresight and strategy, began to take on more responsibility for defending their own cities. Applying the skills and tactics they had learned from their allies, in the midst of these operations, human soldiers performed countless acts of heroism. One memorable instance involved a squad rescuing a group of children trapped in a partially collapsed building. The structure was unstable, and enemy snipers targeted anyone attempting to enter. Undeterred, the human squad moved carefully, using advanced equipment to secure the debris and create safe passages. The children, frightened and exhausted, were guided to safety by hand, carried when necessary, and reassured with calm words and gestures. Civilians watching the rescue could hardly believe the courage displayed, and the story of the squad's bravery spread quickly throughout the city. Inspiring hope and confidence among the population, the humans' actions also left a deep impression on the Al-Irani leadership. Meetings were held in secure zones where humans and Al-Irani strategists discussed long-term defense and recovery plans. The humans offered to train the Al-Irani in advanced tactics, technology use, and emergency response strategies. They shared knowledge that had been developed over decades of human experience on hostile worlds, giving the Al-Irani a fighting chance in the event of future threats. The Al-Irani, in turn, shared their knowledge of the planet, the environment, and cultural practices, ensuring that future human interventions could be even more effective. As the enemy was finally pushed back from the cities and key regions were secured, a sense of relief spread across the planet. Families reunited, children returned to their homes, and streets once filled with terror were now filled with cautious but genuine smiles. Markets began to reopen, makeshift schools were established, and communities started to organize themselves again. Humans continued to provide guidance, but increasingly, the Al-Irani began to manage their own recovery, demonstrating a resilience and determination that inspired even their human allies. With the immediate threats neutralized, the humans helped coordinate large-scale rebuilding efforts. Damaged buildings were repaired, bridges and roads were reconstructed, and public services were restored. Engineers worked alongside Al-Irani, architects to ensure that new structures were stronger and better able to withstand potential future attacks. The Al-Irani people, many of whom had never been involved in such large-scale reconstruction efforts, learned quickly under human guidance, combining their own skills with advanced human technology. During this phase, the humans also facilitated a formal ceremony of gratitude. Thousands of Al-Irani gathered in a central plaza, many still with traces of the battle on their clothes and faces, to honor the humans who had saved them. Speeches were made, expressing deep appreciation for the bravery, skill, and compassion shown by the Deathworlders. The humans, in turn, spoke humbly, emphasizing that their actions were driven by a desire to help, not to conquer or dominate. The bond formed in these moments was powerful and enduring. Diplomatic discussions also took place, resulting in the signing of a long-term alliance. The Al-Irani agreed to share their knowledge of the planet and its systems, while humans pledged to protect them in the future and provide assistance if any new threats emerged. This agreement marked the beginning of a new era for the Al-Irani civilization, one in which they could rebuild with confidence. Knowing that allies from another world had proven their commitment to their survival, even after the formalities, humans continued to ensure that the Al-Irani were able to recover fully. Medics stayed to train local doctors, engineers helped rebuild critical infrastructure, and soldiers remained on patrol to prevent any remaining enemy forces from causing further harm. Civilians, once terrified, now began to move freely, rebuild homes, and return to daily life. Schools reopened, marketplaces were stocked, and communities slowly regained a sense of normalcy. The presence of humans had not only saved lives, but had provided the Al-Irani with the tools, knowledge, and confidence to take care of themselves in the future. One of the final acts of the human intervention was the removal of unexploded enemy ordnance. Specialists moved carefully through cities and rural areas, defusing bombs, disabling traps, and clearing debris. This meticulous work prevented further casualties and allowed rebuilding efforts to proceed safely. The Elerani watched in amazement as humans performed tasks that combined courage, technical expertise, and patience, demonstrating again that their goal was not just to win a battle, but to protect life and ensure a sustainable recovery as the human fleet prepared to depart. A final moment of connection occurred. Civilians and